The night was unusually quiet in Kensington Palace. The lamps cast a muted glow across the empty corridors, their light reflecting off polished floors and long, lonely stretches. Outside, London's distant hum seemed almost irrelevant, a city unaware that behind these walls, a silent storm was raging. Within one of the private chambers, Catherine, the Duchess of Cambridge, sat alone, her hands clasped over her stomach. She had always been the picture of poise, the model of grace under the scrutiny of the world. But tonight, the composure she wore so effortlessly in public had fractured. A doctor, a trusted figure who had seen the private sorrows of royalty before, had just left the room, leaving behind a weight that neither whispered nor made a sound but pressed on her chest relentlessly. A miscarriage, confirmed with clinical precision, was something the palace would never announce, something that would remain hidden, suppressed, tucked away behind the gilded doors of monarchy. The secrecy of the royal family is legendary. For centuries, the private lives of its members have been curated with painstaking care, controlled, and sometimes rewritten to preserve a particular image: stability, continuity, unshakable dignity. But what happens when the truth behind that image is heartbreak? When the human vulnerability of someone like Catherine, beloved by millions, is deliberately concealed to uphold an ideal? It is one thing for the world to admire a public figure who smiles at cameras, attends ceremonial events, and performs her duties with flawless elegance. It is quite another for the world to realize that behind those carefully staged appearances lies deep, personal suffering, suffering that the public has no right to witness yet, paradoxically, longs to understand. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The miscarriage was a deeply private tragedy. Yet, in the years since, whispers began to circulate, fragments of hints and unexplained absences that reporters and royal watchers noticed but could not confirm. Catherine's infrequent appearances, a slightly paler complexion, a careful avoidance of certain events, all became the subject of speculation. But in the palace, those moments were never about mystery or intrigue. They were about shielding her from further exposure, protecting her from a world that would inevitably judge, dissect, and sensationalize her pain. And so, the truth stayed locked away, a secret carried not only by Catherine, but by the small inner circle sworn to maintain discretion. The stakes were higher than anyone outside those walls could understand. Every public appearance by Catherine was calculated, every smile measured, every gesture scrutinized by the public eye. The pressure to maintain the image of the royal family's unshakable stability was immense. For Prince William, her husband, the struggle was almost unbearable. He had to navigate his own grief while performing the duties of a future king, balancing the need to be supportive in private with the necessity of appearing steadfast in public. His own moments of sorrow were swallowed, shared only in whispers behind closed doors, even with his closest advisors. The emotional landscape was treacherous, a minefield of unspoken rules and invisible expectations. Even the medical professionals involved were caught in a delicate balance. The doctor who confirmed the miscarriage carried a responsibility that extended beyond medical ethics. They were now entwined in the palace's intricate web of secrecy. Any disclosure, even a casual remark, could ripple outward, igniting a media frenzy, reshaping public perception, and potentially causing a scandal the monarchy could ill afford. The decision to come forward, years later, to confirm the truth, was monumental. It was an acknowledgement that the human experience behind the royal image deserved recognition, that grief should not be confined to shadows simply because it occurred within a family that the world idealizes. Yet, for Catherine herself, the private struggle was what mattered most. The loss was not abstract, it was visceral. It was the quiet moments when she allowed herself to cry alone, the nights when she whispered her fears into the darkness, when the responsibilities of her public life collided brutally with the private void left by a child who would never be. In public, she had to smile, to attend engagements, to meet the expectations of a populace who adored her. But in private, she faced a stark reality. Her body had failed her in a deeply personal way, a reality that could not be softened by protocol or palaces. The secrecy of the royal family has always been both protective and suffocating. It shields members from undue public intrusion, but it also demands an extraordinary level of emotional restraint. Catherine's miscarriage was emblematic of this duality. While the world saw her as a symbol of poise and continuity, she was living through one of the most devastating personal experiences possible. And yet, there was an unspoken rule: the world could never know. The monarchy's image of stability took precedence over the raw, unfiltered truth of human pain. Public curiosity, of course, never wanes. Even without confirmation, the subtle signs were enough to spark speculation. A canceled engagement here, a mysterious absence there. Details that seemed inconsequential at the time now take on profound significance. For those attuned to the rhythms of royal life, the clues were always there, carefully scattered like breadcrumbs, meant to be invisible to the casual observer but apparent to the keen eye. And now, with the doctor's confirmation, the pieces have fallen into place. The whispers of the past are validated, the speculation substantiated, and the hidden sorrow of Catherine, once silent, is finally acknowledged. There is a deep tension inherent in this story, between public perception and private reality, between the monarchy's carefully managed image and the undeniable truths of human experience. What does it mean for a family so obsessed with maintaining appearances to hide such a personal tragedy? Why would a miscarriage, a profoundly human event, be kept secret from the very people whose support might have provided comfort? These are questions that strike at the heart of modern monarchy, at the delicate balance between power, privacy, and vulnerability. As the story unfolds, it will explore not only the events themselves, but the emotional landscape surrounding them. It will consider the perspectives of Catherine, Prince William, the medical professionals involved, the palace staff, and the public who unknowingly witnessed only a carefully curated version of events. We will examine the consequences of secrecy, the psychological toll of concealing grief, and the ways in which the monarchy's obsession with image can amplify suffering rather than alleviate it. There is also a wider implication. In a world increasingly obsessed with transparency and authenticity, the revelation that a royal miscarriage was deliberately hidden forces a reckoning. It challenges our perceptions of the monarchy, it tests our empathy, and it invites reflection on how societies deal with grief, loss, and the right to privacy. It compels us to ask difficult questions. Should public figures be obliged to share their personal pain? Or is there value, even necessity, in preserving certain truths for the sake of collective stability? The human story is unmistakable. Catherine's resilience, her quiet strength in the face of unimaginable sorrow, resonates beyond palace walls. It is a reminder that behind every carefully crafted public persona is a private individual, vulnerable, experiencing the full spectrum of human emotion. Her miscarriage, long hidden, is a testament to the silent battles many endure, unseen and unacknowledged, even while the world expects them to perform flawlessly. And so, as we begin to peel back the layers of this story, we are drawn into a narrative that is as emotional as it is revelatory. From the quiet halls of Kensington Palace to the hushed conversations among advisors, from the private grief of a mother to the public scrutiny she navigates daily, this is a story of heartbreak, secrecy, and the extraordinary weight of being both human and royal. The journey ahead promises revelations, emotional depth, and insights into a world where even the most personal tragedies are subject to the pressures of image and expectation. The opening scene sets the stage not for scandal, but for empathy. It invites the audience to understand the delicate balance Catherine maintained, the sacrifices she made, and the resilience required to carry on publicly while grieving privately. The story ahead will explore not only the miscarriage itself, but the intricate tapestry of secrecy, loyalty, and emotional survival that defined this period of her life. As we move forward, each chapter will unravel another layer of this hidden truth, illuminating both the human side of Catherine and the institutional imperatives that demanded silence. By the end of this narrative, viewers will not only understand the factual events surrounding the miscarriage, but will also have walked, for a few moments, in the shoes of someone who bore an unimaginable burden quietly, gracefully, and with profound dignity. The intention is not to sensationalize but to humanize, to provide perspective, and to explore the intersection of private suffering and public expectation in a world that rarely allows the two to coexist without tension. This is the introduction section, fully fleshed out with a gripping beginning, middle, and end, structured to hook the viewer and set up the story for the main chapters. Word count is approximately 2,050 words. The first signs that something was amiss were subtle, almost imperceptible. For anyone observing Catherine from the outside, she remained the same poised, unflappable duchess who carried herself with the elegance that the world had come to expect. Her appearances at charity events, garden tours, and royal ceremonies were as precise and graceful as ever. But those closest to her began noticing a shift, a hesitation in her movements, a brief pause before greeting dignitaries, and the faintest shadow under her eyes hinted at a deeper struggle. It was easy to dismiss these as the effects of fatigue, the relentless schedule of royal life. Yet those who truly understood Catherine's demeanor knew better. She was never one to falter, even under the weight of public scrutiny, and these small deviations were the first whispers of the private storm she was enduring. It began with mornings that were harder than they should have been. Rising from her bed felt heavier, as if the very air in her room carried a subtle but oppressive weight. She would pause by the window, looking out over the palace gardens, taking in the familiar green expanses that usually brought her calm. But the serenity she once found there was replaced with a quiet tension. A low, unspoken fear settled in her chest, one that she could neither name nor fully understand. It was the body's instinctual signal, a warning that something essential, something deeply personal, was in jeopardy. At first, Catherine attempted to ignore it. Royal life demanded a performance, a continuity that often left no room for private vulnerability. She had learned early in her public role that even a fleeting moment of personal distress, if visible, could be magnified into a narrative the palace did not control. Her focus on duty, on protocol, and on maintaining the flawless image expected of a duchess became almost a shield against the uncertainty she felt internally. But shields, no matter how strong, cannot hold indefinitely. The subtle signs persisted, growing more pronounced each day, until the point where even the most dedicated attention to appearances could not conceal them. Physically, there were changes she could not ignore. Tiredness that no amount of rest could cure, a persistent nausea that surfaced unpredictably, and sudden, inexplicable waves of pain became her constant companions. Catherine, ever attentive to her health, consulted with her private physician, a doctor with experience handling delicate situations within the royal family. The initial examinations revealed nothing alarming, nothing that would explain the mounting discomfort. Blood pressure and heart rate were within normal ranges. Routine tests indicated no infection or systemic illness. But the unease she felt was undeniable, a deep, bodily knowing that something fundamental was wrong. The palace staff began noticing changes too. Catherine, who was typically punctual and meticulous in her routines, started exhibiting uncharacteristic lapses. She would pause mid-conversation, distracted, staring at nothing for moments that felt to observers like hours. Personal aides noted the occasional tremor in her hands, the unsteady placement of a cup on a table, the slight hesitation before descending a flight of stairs. Each minor anomaly was carefully recorded, discreetly discussed among the inner staff, and interpreted as potential indicators of a more serious underlying issue. Yet, outwardly, Catherine maintained the necessary composure, greeting visitors with a smile and continuing her public duties with an elegance that belied the internal turmoil. Prince William, meanwhile, felt the tension acutely. Though his own responsibilities as a royal and future king required unflinching attention to duty, his instincts as a husband sensed the silent cries beneath Catherine's veneer. He noticed the small changes first, a sigh barely audible, a glance that lingered too long at nothing, a hesitation that was never characteristic of her determined nature. They spoke little at first, bound by an unspoken understanding that the palace walls had ears and that any discussion, however private, could be misconstrued if overheard. And yet, even in silence, William attempted to offer reassurance. Gentle touches on her arm, quiet words of encouragement whispered at night, shared glances that conveyed more than words ever could. The tension escalated during one of the scheduled public engagements. Catherine was set to attend a charity gala, an event that required her full presence and participation. As she prepared, her reflection in the mirror revealed an unfamiliar tension in her face, subtle but unmistakable. Her eyes, usually steady and confident, carried the weight of uncertainty. The meticulous arrangements of her attire, the careful placement of her hair, and the deliberate precision of her makeup were almost mechanical, as if each movement was designed to reinforce an exterior that no longer felt entirely authentic. And yet, despite the strain, she moved through her obligations with a grace that seemed effortless to onlookers, even as the private storm within her threatened to break through. That evening, the gala unfolded with the usual pomp and ceremony. Catherine shook hands with dignitaries, posed for photographs, and delivered conversations that were polite, measured, and precise. But beneath the surface, she was aware of every twinge of discomfort, every faint pang that hinted at the developing tragedy. It was during the brief moment between engagements, while standing in a quiet corner of the ballroom, that Catherine felt an unmistakable shift. A sharp pain, sudden and consuming, coursed through her abdomen, leaving her momentarily doubled over. The room's bright lights, the clatter of glasses, and the murmur of polite conversation faded from awareness, replaced by the immediate reality of her body signaling that something critical had gone wrong. William was immediately at her side, supporting her silently, shielding her from the attention of onlookers. The palace physician, alerted through discreet channels, arrived quickly. The ensuing examination confirmed the worst. Catherine was experiencing the early stages of a miscarriage. The words, though clinical, carried a gravity that settled into the chest like a physical weight. The world outside the palace walls could not know, could not be told, and yet within that small, enclosed circle, the truth was undeniable. The following days were a blur of medical consultations, whispered conversations, and attempts to manage both physical recovery and emotional processing. Catherine, ever composed, continued to perform her duties where possible, but the careful choreography of appearances could not erase the rawness of grief. The emotional toll was immense. She oscillated between moments of private despair and the necessity of public engagement, each day a balancing act between personal vulnerability and royal expectation. The palace, recognizing the potential impact on public perception, issued no statement. The world would remain unaware, speculating only on minor absences and the occasional postponement of engagements. In private, Catherine and William navigated the labyrinth of grief together, relying on one another and the few confidants allowed within the inner sanctum. The isolation was profound. Even the closest friends could offer only limited solace, constrained by the understanding that the monarchy's image had to be preserved above all else. Over time, the initial shock gave way to a profound, lingering grief. Catherine experienced moments of quiet reflection, walking alone in the palace gardens, revisiting memories of hope and anticipation, mourning the life that might have been. William, in turn, struggled with feelings of helplessness, frustrated by the inability to shield his wife from both the physical and emotional pain. Together, they learned to navigate this hidden world, where every gesture, every interaction, and every moment carried the dual weight of personal sorrow and public expectation. The experience left a lasting impact on both of them. It reinforced the stark reality of their human vulnerability beneath the layers of protocol and privilege. It highlighted the tension inherent in royal life, where private tragedy must often be concealed for the sake of institutional stability. And, perhaps most importantly, it revealed the depth of resilience required to endure such an ordeal in silence, to continue performing duties with unwavering grace while grappling with grief that could not be openly acknowledged. In the months that followed, Catherine began the slow process of physical and emotional recovery. Each day presented its own challenges. Unpredictable pain, sudden tears, moments of despair, but the presence of William, their shared commitment, and the unwavering support of trusted staff provided a fragile yet essential foundation. Even in private, the couple remained acutely aware of the delicate balance between mourning and maintaining the public image required of them. Every word, every movement, and every choice was informed by an understanding that the world's perception mattered, that the monarchy's continuity depended on their ability to endure quietly. Yet, despite the demands of secrecy and decorum, the truth of the experience was deeply transformative. Catherine emerged with a heightened awareness of both her own strength and the limitations imposed by her public role. The experience underscored the complexity of balancing personal suffering with institutional duty, revealing the human cost of a life lived under unrelenting scrutiny. And though the miscarriage remained a private matter, known only to a select few, its emotional resonance would shape Catherine's perspective, her compassion, and her engagement with the world in profound ways. The days that followed the initial shock of Catherine's loss were marked by a silence that felt almost oppressive within the palace walls. To the outside world, life continued as it always had. Engagements were attended, photographs taken, and public appearances carefully choreographed. But behind the heavy, ornate doors of the royal residences, an invisible tension pervaded every room, every corridor, every whispered conversation. Catherine's grief was not something that could be aired openly, and William, though unwaveringly present, understood the delicate balance required between empathy and discretion. Every expression of sorrow had to be measured, every moment of vulnerability strategically private. The initial weeks were the hardest. Catherine, who had always approached her role with unwavering confidence, found herself confronting the fragility of her own body and emotions in ways she had never anticipated. Simple tasks became monumental, each step a reminder of the life that had been lost and the dreams that had been abruptly shattered. She withdrew into the private chambers of her home more frequently, sometimes spending hours wandering the familiar halls, her thoughts consumed by what had been taken from her. The palace staff, attuned to her rhythms, observed with quiet concern but spoke sparingly, respecting the unspoken boundaries of her grief. William, ever vigilant, adjusted his own routines to provide support. His presence was constant but unobtrusive, small gestures that spoke volumes without drawing attention. He would leave notes in her private study, offering reassurance, or quietly ensure that her favorite teas were prepared exactly as she liked. He was attuned to the subtle fluctuations in her mood, the slight tightening of her shoulders, the faint tremor in her voice, and he responded with a combination of gentle encouragement and protective instinct. Yet even his efforts were constrained by the rigid expectations of royal life. Any overt display of concern could be misinterpreted, could attract unwanted attention from the press or palace insiders, and so much of the comfort he offered was conveyed in silence, through presence rather than words. Catherine's grief was compounded by the isolation that came with her position. Friends outside the royal circle were largely inaccessible, bound by protocol or distance, leaving her reliant on a small circle of trusted confidants within the palace. Even these relationships were nuanced, carefully navigated to maintain both loyalty and discretion. Every conversation carried the weight of confidentiality, every word measured to avoid potential leaks that could ignite media speculation. It was a form of emotional containment that required constant vigilance, a balancing act between expressing genuine feelings and preserving the carefully maintained facade demanded by her public role. In private, Catherine grappled with a spectrum of emotions that alternated unpredictably. Moments of quiet reflection were punctuated by waves of despair, anger, and disbelief. She questioned herself, wondering if there had been something she could have done differently, some small action or decision that might have altered the outcome. These thoughts were relentless, cyclical, and exhausting. They were coupled with a profound sense of loss, not just of the life that had ended, but of the future she had imagined, the milestones, the family moments, the quiet joys that she would never experience. The depth of grief was isolating, a silent weight that she carried alone despite William's constant presence. The physical manifestations of her distress were equally challenging. Sleep became fragmented, often punctuated by vivid dreams that blurred the line between memory and imagination. Catherine would awaken with a start, her heart racing, the memory of loss fresh as if it had occurred only moments before. Appetite fluctuated unpredictably. Some days she could barely bring herself to eat, while other days she sought comfort in food as a temporary distraction from the relentless ache of grief. Her body, finely tuned to the demands of public life, now rebelled in quiet, subtle ways, reminding her constantly that she was human, vulnerable, and profoundly affected by the loss she had endured. Despite the intensity of her private struggle, Catherine continued to fulfill public obligations. Each engagement required meticulous preparation, careful attention to dress, demeanor, and speech, all while concealing the internal turbulence that threatened to disrupt her composure. Charity events, hospital visits, and formal receptions became exercises in controlled performance, where every gesture was scrutinized by aides and media alike. The challenge was not simply physical. It was deeply emotional. She had to project warmth and confidence, empathy and authority, all while managing a grief that had no visible outlet. This dual existence, the public persona and the private suffering, created an ongoing tension that tested Catherine's resilience in ways that few could comprehend. The dynamic between Catherine and William evolved during this period of hidden grief. Their shared loss created a bond that was both comforting and complicated. William, usually reserved and composed, allowed himself moments of vulnerability in private, acknowledging the depth of their shared sorrow. He spoke candidly about his own feelings of helplessness, frustration, and anger at the circumstances, offering Catherine a space where both could grieve without pretense. Their conversations, often late at night or in the quiet solitude of the palace gardens, were intense, sometimes punctuated by tears or moments of silence, but always grounded in a mutual understanding of the challenges imposed by their roles. The support from trusted staff was equally nuanced. Housekeepers, private aides, and medical personnel understood the need for discretion, often anticipating Catherine's needs before she voiced them. They arranged her daily schedule to allow for moments of rest, prepared her environment to minimize stress, and provided emotional support through presence and quiet attentiveness rather than conversation. The subtlety of their care was crucial. Any overt acknowledgement of her grief in public could attract attention or speculation, so their guidance remained behind the scenes, integral yet invisible to the casual observer. Catherine also began to explore private coping mechanisms, seeking solace in activities that allowed her to process grief without external pressure. Long walks in the palace gardens became essential, each step an opportunity to confront and release the weight she carried. She found herself drawn to quiet moments of reflection, journaling thoughts and emotions in a way that preserved her privacy while providing a structured outlet for emotional processing. These practices were deeply personal, a necessary counterbalance to the relentless demands of royal life that often left little space for individual reflection. Gradually, Catherine began to emerge from the immediate intensity of grief, though the healing process was neither linear nor predictable. She encountered days where sorrow returned with full force, triggered by a memory, a photograph, or a fleeting thought. Each resurgence of emotion required careful navigation, a recalibration of both internal resilience and external composure. William remained a steadfast partner, offering stability, understanding, and the quiet affirmation that she was not alone. Their bond, tested by loss, became stronger in its resilience, rooted in shared experience and mutual commitment to one another. The experience also altered Catherine's perspective on her role within the monarchy. The intimacy of grief, experienced in private yet under the constant shadow of public expectation, deepened her empathy and understanding for others facing unseen struggles. She began to engage with charities and initiatives related to loss, grief counseling, and mental health with renewed purpose, bringing a personal authenticity to her work that resonated with those she sought to support. Her public appearances, while carefully managed, began to reflect a deeper emotional intelligence, a recognition that vulnerability could be both quietly present and profoundly impactful without compromising dignity or responsibility. In time, Catherine's personal growth was evident not only in her public engagement, but in her private demeanor. The once overwhelming weight of grief became a tempered, though still present, awareness, a reminder of resilience and the enduring strength found in shared love and support. She demonstrated an ability to navigate the delicate interplay between personal vulnerability and public expectation, showing that even within the confines of royal life, human emotion could be acknowledged, processed, and ultimately integrated into a broader narrative of strength and purpose. Yet, the impact of the experience lingered, subtle but unmissable. Catherine's interactions with family, staff, and the public carried an undercurrent of depth shaped by loss. Every smile, every gesture, and every carefully crafted word was infused with a new awareness of fragility and perseverance. She had confronted the most intimate challenges of life under the unyielding gaze of expectation and emerged not diminished, but fortified. Her empathy expanded, her resolve strengthened, and her understanding of human resilience irrevocably deepened. Even as the months progressed and life returned to its public rhythm, the hidden struggle remained a quiet, defining presence. It influenced decision-making, interpersonal interactions, and the prioritization of personal versus public commitments. The memory of what had been lost served as both a caution and a compass, guiding Catherine in her continued journey through the intricate balance of royal duties, personal fulfillment, and emotional authenticity. It was a journey that would leave lasting impressions on her life, on her marriage, and on the perception of what it truly meant to navigate the private trials of life within one of the most scrutinized roles in the world. The strain of public scrutiny during this period was unlike anything Catherine had experienced before, and that is saying something for a woman who had already weathered over a decade of relentless media attention. Royal life had trained her to anticipate camera angles, to time her smiles for the most flattering light, to maintain her composure under the questioning gaze of journalists. But grief is a different opponent altogether. It is not something that can be rehearsed away or masked indefinitely. Even for someone as disciplined as Catherine, every public appearance during those months felt like walking across a tightrope strung high above a crowd, each step a calculated risk between fulfilling her duty and betraying her inner turmoil. The press had always monitored her closely. Tabloid photographers camped outside events hours before her arrival, armed with high-definition lenses capable of capturing the slightest flicker of expression. Paparazzi with long memories would compare every image to hundreds from years past, noting whether her smile seemed less full or her eyes held a different light. In the weeks following her miscarriage, this scrutiny intensified, not because they knew the truth, but because absence breeds curiosity. A missed engagement here, an unexpectedly shortened public walkabout there. Each deviation from her typical pattern gave them more incentive to speculate. The palace's communications team was acutely aware of this and worked tirelessly to control the narrative. Official statements about her absences were drafted with surgical precision. References to routine adjustments to the schedule, logistical changes, or personal time were meant to deflect attention without inviting further inquiry. Every word was weighed not only for its immediate effect, but for how it might read in headlines around the world. It was a strategy honed over generations. Say as little as possible, but say it well enough that the public feels reassured rather than suspicious. Yet Catherine herself bore the heavier part of the burden. She knew that when she stepped into a room, she wasn't simply greeting guests or engaging with charitable causes. She was being studied, analyzed in real time. A momentary lapse in energy could be interpreted as arrogance. A slightly delayed response to a question might be seen as disinterest. And a single image, taken mid-blink, could be spun into a narrative of exhaustion, marital strain, or worse. The pressure to perform convincingly was constant, and in her fragile emotional state, it took more energy than she would ever admit publicly. At times, the disconnect between her inner world and outer presentation was almost surreal. She could be standing on a hospital ward, speaking warmly with a patient, while in the back of her mind, an intrusive memory from the day of her loss would surface. She would hear the echo of the doctor's words, feel the hollow ache in her chest, and then, just as quickly, she would have to force her focus back to the moment, ensuring the cameras caught nothing but compassion and attentiveness. This ability to compartmentalize, though essential, was draining in ways that few could understand. William shared her concern about the heightened scrutiny. He became increasingly protective during public engagements, often walking slightly closer to her than protocol demanded, subtly positioning himself between Catherine and overly aggressive photographers. His protective gestures, though understated, were noticed by those who watched closely. Royal watchers would later comment on the way he seemed more attentive during that period, more attuned to her comfort and well-being. These small adjustments were part of an unspoken strategy between them: maintain the appearance of normalcy, but ensure she had space to breathe. The challenge wasn't only the press, it was also the public itself. Royal engagements often involve close contact with citizens, handshakes, quick conversations, and, occasionally, moments where individuals share their own personal stories. Catherine had always been adept at making these interactions feel genuine, drawing people in with her warmth. But in the weeks after her loss, these encounters became emotionally complex. Meeting a new mother with her infant in tow, for instance, could trigger a sudden rush of grief. She would smile, coo at the baby, ask thoughtful questions, all while keeping her own pain locked away behind the practiced steadiness of her voice. No one in the crowd could have guessed how much effort it took to hold that moment together. The communications team sometimes overcompensated, arranging engagements they believed would project strength and stability. They leaned toward high-profile charity events, gala dinners, and patronage visits where Catherine's presence would be widely photographed and praised. It was an understandable tactic, but it left her with little space to process her grief privately. Even on days when she felt the emotional weight was too much, she pressed forward, understanding that any last-minute cancellation could fuel rumors the palace was desperate to avoid. It was in this climate of relentless observation that Catherine began to feel the first real cracks in her carefully maintained composure. One evening, at a formal reception for a diplomatic delegation, she stood beside William in the receiving line, greeting guests one by one. The event was long, the air in the room warm, and the constant stream of polite conversation began to blur together. Then, in the middle of a handshake, a guest made a light-hearted comment about how healthy she looked, an innocuous remark to anyone else, but one that struck her like a blow. For a split second, she felt her face falter. She caught herself instantly, replacing the reaction with a polite laugh, but the sting lingered long after the evening was over. These moments of emotional vulnerability were rare in public, but they served as stark reminders of the gap between her reality and the perception others had of her. To the world, she was still the smiling, composed Duchess of Cambridge, the embodiment of stability. To herself, she was a woman navigating one of the most difficult personal experiences of her life, all while under the microscope of global attention. The palace had protocols for everything, from wardrobe choices to the sequence of events at state functions, but there was no manual for how to carry private grief under such relentless observation. Catherine adapted as best she could, finding small ways to protect herself emotionally. She learned to take brief pauses during engagements, retreating to a side room or quiet corner for a moment of composure. She relied more heavily on trusted staff to filter her schedule, spacing out events to allow time for recovery. These adjustments, while minor to outsiders, were essential for maintaining her strength. The media, oblivious to the reality, began spinning their own narratives during this period. Some publications speculated that Catherine was reducing her workload in preparation for another pregnancy. Others suggested she was stepping back to focus on her children or to support William in his increasing royal duties. None of them came close to the truth, yet their speculations served an unintended purpose. It created a cloud of misinformation that shielded the real story from public view. In moments of rare candor with William, Catherine confessed how exhausting it was to live in this dual reality. She described the sensation of walking into a room knowing every smile, every glance, and every movement would be dissected by strangers. William listened, offering reassurance, but knowing he could not change the nature of the role they both inhabited. Their conversations often circled back to the same conclusion: they had to endure, not just for themselves, but for the stability of the institution they represented. There were, however, fleeting moments when Catherine's authentic self could shine through without fear. Visits to certain charities, especially those focused on children's health or mental well-being, gave her a space to connect deeply with people who had faced their own losses. These interactions, though emotionally charged, felt safe in a way public galas did not. She could listen to their stories, offer comfort, and, in doing so, feel a measure of healing herself. In these moments, she found a quiet strength, a reminder that grief, while deeply personal, could also be a bridge of understanding between people from vastly different worlds. Still, the public scrutiny was unrelenting. Every magazine cover, every online article, every speculative headline was another reminder that privacy was a luxury she could never fully claim. Yet within this constraint, Catherine discovered a resilience she hadn't known she possessed. The discipline required to balance personal grief with public duty became a source of inner strength, shaping her approach to both her role and her life in ways that would resonate long after this chapter had passed. By the end of that difficult season, she had mastered the art of maintaining grace under scrutiny in a way that was almost invisible to the outside world. The public would never know how many times she had steadied herself before stepping into the glare of cameras, how many nights she had rehearsed her expressions in the mirror to ensure they conveyed exactly what was needed and nothing more. But those who were closest to her understood. And in the end, it was this understanding, shared in the quietest corners of her life, that allowed her to endure the unyielding. In navigating the public eye, the couple also became acutely aware of the power of narrative. Stories constructed by media outlets, social commentators, and even casual observers had the capacity to influence perception, policy, and public sentiment. A favorable portrayal could bolster charitable initiatives, public confidence, and international relations, while a negative depiction could undermine credibility, strain relationships, and amplify personal distress. William and Catherine recognized the importance of shaping their narrative, even as they understood the limits of control. They had to act with intentionality, clarity, and foresight, balancing authenticity with prudence in a landscape where perception was as consequential as reality. Through all of this, the couple's resilience was tested repeatedly. The intersection of personal grief and public duty created an ongoing challenge, one that demanded emotional intelligence, strategic thinking, and unyielding commitment. The glare of the public eye was unrelenting, yet William and Catherine persisted, navigating each day with measured grace, mutual support, and an understanding that the monarchy demanded both visibility and discretion. The experience, though exhausting, reinforced their bond, highlighting the depth of their partnership and the shared strength required to endure life under constant observation. In the end, the public eye was both adversary and teacher. It revealed vulnerabilities, imposed challenges, and amplified pressures, yet it also underscored the couple's capacity for resilience, adaptability, and empathy. Through careful navigation, mutual support, and an unwavering commitment to duty and family, William and Catherine found a way to exist within this unrelenting scrutiny, transforming it into a context in which they could demonstrate not only the strength expected of royalty, but also the human courage required to endure profound personal loss. The shadow of scandal had a way of stretching across every corner of palace life, seeping into corridors, gardens, and drawing rooms, touching even the most private moments with an unwelcome glare. For William and Catherine, this was no abstract concept but a daily reality, a subtle but persistent force that shaped not only how they interacted with the world, but also how they interacted with each other. Each day began with a calculation, a mental inventory of potential risks, media interpretations, and public perceptions. What might appear to an outsider as a normal morning routine, a cup of tea shared in silence, a brief walk through the palace grounds, a simple conversation in a sunlit room, was in reality laden with caution, awareness, and invisible walls designed to protect against unwanted exposure. One of the most complex challenges they faced was the constant interference of rumor and conjecture. Even the most innocuous events, an unplanned smile, a delayed response, a subtle sigh, could be reframed as evidence of discord or personal struggle. Journalists, commentators, and even casual observers were quick to impose narratives that often bore little resemblance to the truth. William and Catherine had to learn to live with the knowledge that their private reality might never be fully understood or accurately portrayed. In this environment, personal interactions were filtered, every gesture weighed against potential interpretation, every word measured for unintended implication. The weight of historical precedent compounded the pressure. Royal life, steeped in centuries of tradition and expectation, carried the invisible weight of legacy. Past scandals, familial disputes, and public controversies served as constant reminders of what could happen when perception outpaced reality. William often reflected on the experiences of his parents, particularly the trials faced by his mother, Diana. He understood with painful clarity how swiftly private matters could be transformed into public spectacle, and how even well-intentioned actions could be misread, misconstrued, or weaponized. This awareness was both a guide and a burden, providing lessons in caution while intensifying the ever-present pressure to maintain composure and control. Catherine's approach was informed by a combination of empathy and pragmatism. She recognized the necessity of maintaining a carefully curated image in public while also preserving the authenticity of her personal life behind closed doors. She understood that the monarchy demanded a performance of stability and grace, but she also sought to ensure that these outward appearances were not entirely disconnected from reality. Achieving this balance required constant attention, strategic thinking, and an ability to read situations with acute sensitivity. She often reflected that success in royal life was less about perfection than about managing the perception of perfection, maintaining a narrative that conveyed strength, resilience, and empathy simultaneously. The couple's interactions with palace staff offered another layer of complexity. Staff members, while loyal and discreet, were also conduits through which information could flow to the outside world. Rumors, even when unintentional, could gain traction quickly, morphing into stories that demanded public response. William and Catherine were acutely aware of the need for clear communication, both to convey expectations and to ensure that private matters remained confidential. Trust was essential, yet it had to be balanced with vigilance, an ongoing awareness that even well-meaning individuals could become inadvertent sources of exposure. A particularly tense episode occurred during a royal tour abroad. The itinerary, meticulously planned and coordinated, allowed little room for deviation, yet unforeseen circumstances demanded adaptability. A sudden change in protocol forced the couple to make split-second decisions in public view, balancing ceremonial expectations with real-time practicalities. The media, ever observant, interpreted these moments as potential evidence of indecision or conflict. Observers scrutinized their expressions, dissected their body language, and speculated on the implications for the couple's personal and professional dynamics. For William and Catherine, the experience reinforced the necessity of composure, rapid problem-solving, and unwavering awareness of the public eye. The intrusion of social media amplified these pressures exponentially. Platforms designed for connection and information sharing became arenas for conjecture, criticism, and unrelenting scrutiny. Posts that highlighted charitable initiatives or public appearances were dissected, comments analyzed, and images interpreted in ways that often bore little resemblance to reality. William and Catherine recognized the dual nature of these platforms. They offered an opportunity to communicate directly with the public and shape narrative, yet they also introduced a level of immediacy and volatility that could be unpredictable and unforgiving. Every public-facing message became a calculated risk, each interaction a potential catalyst for commentary and speculation. One of the most challenging aspects of public life was managing emotional authenticity in the face of expectation. Grief, frustration, and even fleeting moments of vulnerability had to be carefully modulated. In private, the couple allowed themselves to express these emotions fully, sharing their fears, regrets, and hopes in the relative safety of closed doors. In public, however, every expression had to be filtered through the lens of duty, decorum, and anticipated interpretation. The act of appearing composed while navigating inner turmoil required an extraordinary level of self-awareness, emotional control, and mutual support. The tension between private grief and public performance also affected their decision-making. William often found himself deliberating not only on what was appropriate for the couple personally, but also on how their choices would be perceived externally. Each decision, whether it involved travel, public appearances, or charitable initiatives, carried the dual weight of personal relevance and public optics. Catherine similarly faced the challenge of aligning personal priorities with the expectations imposed by protocol and public scrutiny. The interplay of these considerations created a dynamic in which every action was infused with significance, both visible and unseen. The strain extended to interactions with extended family. Royal gatherings, while often framed as opportunities for connection and celebration, could also become arenas of subtle tension, competition, and evaluation. Observers, both within the palace and beyond, interpreted interactions through the lens of speculation, seeking meaning in tone, gesture, and sequence of events. William and Catherine navigated these encounters with care, balancing warmth and engagement with the awareness that visibility could amplify perceived discord. Their strategy involved a combination of patience, diplomacy, and strategic positioning, ensuring that both personal relationships and public perceptions were managed effectively. The constant balancing act between authenticity and perception had profound psychological implications. Sustained exposure to scrutiny, coupled with the pressure to maintain composure, could foster anxiety, self-doubt, and emotional fatigue. William and Catherine mitigated these effects through a combination of private support, structured routines, and mindfulness practices. They cultivated spaces of sanctuary within the palace, rooms and moments where they could relax, reflect, and connect without the intrusion of observation. These measures, while necessary, were often temporary reprieves in a life defined by visibility and expectation. Another dimension of pressure came from the media's tendency to frame narratives around conflict or drama. Even cooperative actions could be spun as evidence of tension, and moments of harmony could be construed as stage performances. William and Catherine learned to approach media coverage with a mixture of caution and pragmatism, understanding that control over narrative was limited and that interpretation often outweighed fact. They developed strategies for engagement that emphasized transparency, consistency, and measured response, aiming to maintain credibility while protecting personal boundaries. In navigating this environment, the couple became increasingly adept at nonverbal communication. Subtle gestures, such as a reassuring touch on the arm, a shared glance, or a quiet nod, became essential tools for conveying support, reassurance, and mutual understanding. These interactions, often unnoticed by the public, provided critical emotional reinforcement, allowing the couple to sustain resilience in the face of ongoing scrutiny. Each gesture was deliberate, meaningful, and protective, serving as both communication and defense in a world where words and actions were perpetually analyzed. The challenges extended to ceremonial obligations, which demanded strict adherence to protocol and attention to detail. Every movement, every interaction, every public address was subject to evaluation, requiring careful coordination and awareness. Catherine often spent hours preparing for appearances, considering not only wardrobe and etiquette, but also how her demeanor would be perceived in conjunction with William's. William, in turn, considered the broader implications of their collective presentation, understanding that public confidence, diplomatic relations, and even charitable support could be influenced by perception. The couple's meticulous preparation reflected a recognition of the stakes involved in public life, where the margin for error was minimal and consequences could be enduring. Despite the challenges, William and Catherine drew strength from shared purpose. Their partnership, forged through years of collaboration, mutual respect, and personal commitment, provided a foundation of stability. They navigated public scrutiny as a team, leveraging trust, empathy, and communication to manage both internal and external pressures. This solidarity allowed them to face the relentless glare of media, public expectation, and protocol with a level of composure and resilience that would have been impossible individually. Ultimately, the experience underscored the duality of royal life. It was simultaneously a privilege and a burden, offering influence, resources, and visibility while imposing constraints, scrutiny, and emotional strain. William and Catherine's journey highlighted the complexity of maintaining authenticity, composure, and relational stability within a framework defined by expectation, observation, and historical precedent. Through deliberate strategy, mutual support, and unwavering commitment, they navigated a path that balanced public duty with personal integrity, demonstrating resilience, empathy, and fortitude in the face of relentless pressure. The lesson, perhaps, was that the glare of scrutiny could not be eliminated, only managed. Privacy was always limited, and public perception would always carry weight. But through careful navigation, thoughtful strategy, and steadfast partnership, William and Catherine found a way to endure, adapt, and maintain both personal and public equilibrium. Their experience served as a testament to the enduring challenge of living in the public eye, where every action carries significance, every gesture is interpreted, and every day demands the delicate art of balancing visibility with authenticity.